Welcome to AboutFACE Theatre presents 5 Questions With, and today's guest, director Ben Barnes. Ben is the director of the Theatre Royal in Waterford, where he oversaw the recent restoration of the theatre. He's also the former artistic director of the Abbey and of Dublin's Gaiety Theatre. He has directed nearly 40 productions for the Abbey, 16 productions for the Gate, and has worked extensively in the United States and Canada. He's the recipient of many awards, including several Irish Times Theatre Awards and MECCA and Masque Awards in Montreal. In opera, he was the founding artistic director of Opera Theatre Company, Ireland's national touring opera company, and his recent opera productions include Madama Butterfly for Irish National Opera at the Bord Gais Theatre, which was subsequently filmed by RT. Ben, you're very welcome.
Oh, that sounds exhaustive. I'm exhausted listening to all that. Anyway, yeah, nice to be with you. Yeah.
Thanks for being here. So the first question is just what play or experience first got you interested in theater, got you into theater?
Yeah, that's an interesting question for me because, you know, I don't come from a theater background. I grew up in Wexford in the 1960s, early 70s, and I didn't really have much of an experience of kind of going to the theater. Occasionally we would go to Dublin and be brought to something, but I don't have very many memories of that. I worked backstage with the Wexford Opera Festival when I was in school, and I developed a love of opera, I suppose, from that time. But I didn't really get involved in theatre much until I moved to Dublin. I went to UCD in the early to mid 70s, and I was fortunate at that time to be, when I was at Dramsoc, to be with a group of people who were very serious about the theatre and subsequently wanted to make a career in it. And you know, people like Paul Mercier and Jerry Stembridge, Martin Drury, Gordon Cranich, Mary Ryan. I mean, it was a big Michael Scott, you know, a big group of people who subsequently ended up having careers in the theatre. So, you know, we weren't all in it for just recreational purposes. I mean, we weren't doing theatre degrees because those sort of degrees didn't exist in those days. My studies were in medieval history, in fact. But anyway, to get on to your question, it's not so much you know, an experience in the theatre that made me want to get into the theatre, rather an experience that while I was in the theatre made me want to stay. Because after I left university, I was very fortunate with Michael Scott, in fact, to be awarded a scholarship by the Arts Council to work as a trainee director. It wasn't worth very much monetarily, but it did open doors. And you know, I was an assistant director of the Abbey and the Gate, and I got various bursaries to go and spend time in English National Opera, Welsh National Opera, German theatre, German opera houses. And, you know, it was a fantastic, you know, training ground for me. But when I was at the Abbey, Joe Dowling was the artistic director, and I was kind of doing a bit of everything, and I was assisting you know, various directors on various productions, and I was starting to do some lunchtime theatre in the Peacock. But you know, things for me at you know, now when I look back at it, I mean, it's a ridiculously young age of 24. But I mean, for me, I kind of felt like you know, I'd been to university, I'd done a lot of shows in there. I was in the Abbey, and I'd been there for over a year, and I didn't really feel things were moving quickly enough for me. And I thought, I genuinely wondered whether I would stay in the theatre, or whether I would. My default was to go back to academia because I was a history graduate. And I'd started doing an MA in the history department, and I had been doing some teaching there, and then I dropped out of that, but I'd always had the intention to go back. But the theatre, once I got this Arts Council bursary, the theatre I felt was opening up to me, but I didn't really feel like I was getting anywhere. And I was quite seriously thinking at that time that I might go back to academic life. Anyway, I used to sit in on dress rehearsals in the Abbey for, you know, big productions, and would often only be myself, the director, the writer, if the writer was a live writer, and a couple of other people at sometimes these rather wonderful dress rehearsals. And I was fortunate enough to be in the audience or in the theatre at the dress rehearsal of Faith Theatre, Brian Friel's play, which Joe Dowling directed with John Kavanagh, Kate Flynn, and of course Donal McCann playing Faith Theatre. And I will never forget the experience of sitting in the auditorium at that dress rehearsal. I mean, it was just absolutely magical, particularly Donal McCann's performance. I mean, there was an alchemy about that man and about the way he acted. And, it was just mesmeric. And I always remember at the end of the rehearsal, Joe Dowling walking down the auditorium and the actors coming to the front. And he just said, and I've never heard this from the director before or since, he just said, I don't have any notes. And it really, I mean, and I didn't think that was derelict on Joe's part, because I can't imagine anything more perfect. And I thought at that dress rehearsal, I thought, well, if work like this of that caliber is possible, both in terms of the writing and in terms of the acting, well, then I really want to be a part of this. And it really steeled my resolve and made me hang on in there. And eventually, about 6 months later, I did eventually get a break, and sort of things developed from there. But those dress rehearsals were always interesting affairs, because I remember also being on the being at the dress rehearsal for the first performance of A Life by Hugh Leonard.
Yeah.
And that was not such a stellar dress rehearsal. Lots of things went wrong. And Cyril Cusack, who played drum for the first time, of course, Cyril Cusack, legendary and wonderful actor. But by that stage of his life, he was struggling a little bit with his memory and with lines. And I have a good story, which I won't go into, about that with him when I worked with him subsequently. But at this dress rehearsal anyway, he was pretty approximate with what he was saying, And I was sitting behind Hugh Leonard, and Hugh was here, and I think Joe was also the director of that. I can't remember, but there's a couple of other people, and it was so bad that Cyril Cusack came out at the end of the dress rehearsal and came down to the front of the stage and crouched down and said out into the dark auditorium, he said, "Jack," because Hugh Leonard used to be called Jack. He said, "Jack, I'm really sorry. I'll know my lines tomorrow." And Hugh Leonard shot back, "Yes, Jack. Yes, Cyril, but will you know mine?" That was a good moment. Anyway, I had a wonderful apprenticeship at the Abbey, and to a lesser extent at the Gaiety. But I mean, the Abbey was really where I gravitated. I always wanted to work at the Abbey when I was in college. We used to go to the Peacock all the time, in the loge in the Peacock, and they used to sell tickets at the Students' Union in UCD, and you could get them for £1 at the time. And we used to go there all the time and see some wonderful productions. And it was a dream of mine to work at the Abbey, and so I was very I was delighted to work there. But as I say, things move slowly. But after that experience at Faith Theatre, I had no doubt that this is what I wanted to do with my career, my life.
I love that.
Great. So okay. So Ben, you're saying, like, talking about that production of Faith Theatre being a big influence. But what's a great play that you love, and why?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, because I've been fortunate in my career to have worked on a lot of great plays, and I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of great writers, Irish writers. I worked with John B. Keane on refining his great plays, Big Maggie, The Scythe and The Field, which I did at the Abbey in the 1980s, and we paired those plays back to 2-act versions, which became the standard acting versions subsequent to those productions. and I worked on the first production of Brian Priel's version of Uncle Vanya, a lot of plays with Bernard Farrell and Jim Nolan and Aidan Matthews and Graham Reed, and I was very fortunate to work on a lot of new plays. But I think if I'm to really rack my brains and go back over all the things I've done, I think one of the plays I most admire is the Gaiety concert by Tom Murphy. And when I was artistic director of the Abbey, we did a season of Murphy plays. We did 6 plays. I can't remember what the collective title was, but I know Tom Murphy wanted to call them 6 of the best. Anyway, so different directors came in. We did 6 plays in a 3-week period, and we did some contextualizing interviews, including a wonderful interview that Michael Billington did with Tom Murphy from the Abbey stage. But I was fortunate enough to direct the Gaiety concert with Owen Rowe and Mark Lambert playing the 2 guys. And Tom came into rehearsal and rehearsed the production with us. And there's something about that play, it's a great hymn to men in middle-age crisis, and both men in that play. And the writing is as close to music as, I've ever encountered. And I mean, of course, Tom uses the opera music. It was playing when he wrote the play, and he almost scored the speeches. The Tosselli Serenade section, for instance, the speech is scored to that. And, Tom gave us a few, what I could only describe as master classes on how to deliver the language, and, how in a particular speech that the Irishman has that the word "and" was used to kind of ratchet up the tension and the emotion as the speech went on. And I just found that an incredibly moving play, and very accomplished and very brilliant. And I think it has to be, I was just, somebody from the United States recently asked me could they use a line that I'd written in an essay about the Gaiety concert in some article they were writing, or book or whatever. And I said, of course, that's no problem. And I reread the article that I wrote. It's in a collection of essays on Tom Murphy's work, which was published about a decade ago by Carysford Press. And I made a case in that for saying that, I think that the Gaiety concert is, should rank with, Juno and the Paycock, the Playboy, the Western World translations as one of the great Irish plays of the 20th century. Unfortunately, Murphy's work has not had that sort of international acclaim that Brian Priel's work has had, or that, more recently Martin McDonagh or Conor McPherson. But, and I'm always puzzled about that, because I always tried in the companies that I work for in the United States to interest them in Murphy's work. But what I discovered is that they find it very hard to read, I mean, it's written in such a muscular, Irish idiom. And that I think it comes off the page so beautifully and so brilliantly. But if you try to read as somebody who's not familiar with that type of language, if you try and read the Gaiety concert or Whistle in the Dark or Ballygan Goire, they don't immediately strike you as brilliant or as musical as they actually are. And I just don't think that Tom's plays have broken through internationally in the same way that, some of the other writers have. But for me, the Gaiety concert is one of the, great dramas of the 20th century in the Irish canon. And I was so thrilled to direct it in 2000 and whatever year it was, 2001 or 2. And I'd love to do it again, because it's just a play that continues to, give up its secrets. It's a marvelous piece of work.
Beautiful. So you talked a little bit about things, unexpected dress rehearsals, things not being exactly as you thought they might be. So can you tell us about a time in your theatrical life where things turned out differently than you had expected them to?
Oh my God.
The one time that happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, that sounds like most of the time rather than, I suppose one of the most, celebrated instances in my career where something didn't work out as I thought or hoped it might be was on the whole issue of, the vexed question of the building at the Abbey Theatre, because when I went in there to the theatre, the conventional wisdom was that, eventually the theatre would be refurbished on the existing site, and, plans existed which hadn't been acted upon, to allow for that to happen. And so I kind of picked up that baton when I went in there. But I'm not good on dates, so it probably around 2001. It wasn't shortly after I became the artistic director. It became clear that an option existed for the theatre to move to a completely new site at Grand Canal Harbour, where the Bord Gais Energy Theatre is currently sited. Okay. And we were offered, where the Bord Gais Energy Theatre is, the Abbey was offered that site. And not only that, but the Docklands Authority at the time offered the theatre the incentive of a, what would you call it? Not a charge, but anyway, I don't know what the phrase for it is, but all the businesses in the area would make a contribution, to the cultural anchor and in the area. So to me, that sounded like a very good option. And I, at the time, as I say, operating on the existing site was the conventional wisdom, but I brought the idea of moving to Grand Canal Harbour, first to the board of the theatre, who were enthusiastic, and then to the Department of Arts, which was run at the time by Sheila De Valera. And I remember going down there to show her the site with a number of her civil servants, at a fairly senior level in the department. And she agreed with me that this would be a good option, and that she would take it to the Taoiseach of the day, who was Bertie Ahern. But in the meantime, and we drew up some plans for this, and we wanted to make an announcement to say that this would be our preferred option. Yeah. But the Taoiseach was not enthusiastic about this idea, because he wanted the Abbey to remain on the north side of the city. It was one of the few kind of cultural touchstones in that part of the city. What was ironic, and there was a lot of press reaction to the idea of the Abbey moving over. Why would you want to move out of the centre of the city? And there was a lot of stuff about Misery Hill, and and at the time it was just a brownfield site. But I think we could all see that in 20 years' time that this was going to be a wonderful area of the city, as it's turned out to be. And it's a hub for all the all the technological firms, the Googles and the Twitters and all so on. They're all down there. But that vision wasn't there at the time. And anyway, we announced that this would be our preference, but there was a lot of pushback from the Taoiseach at the time, and the board went into retreat on that, and I got a little bit isolated in terms of my advocacy for it, and what was called an expert group was set up to examine the viability of the brownfield site over staying on Abbey Street. And of course, an expert group is a euphemism for kicking something into the long grass. And that's what happened, and it kind of never went anywhere. But I think it's a great missed opportunity for the Abbey. I think the opportunity is to have moved to a site like that, to have had 3 auditoria and proper facilities in that wonderful location. I think there was a failure of nerve on a lot of people, and there was a big backlash in the press against it. And I think the Taoiseach, I think it was rather, we weren't talking about moving we were technically talking about moving the theatre to the south side, but it was Rings End, for God's sake. We weren't talking about moving it to Blackrock,
Yeah.
I sort of famously said at one stage on the radio that I thought it would be easier to move the river, to keep the Abbey on the north side than to move the Abbey from the north side to the south side. Anyway, it was a big deal at the time, and there was a lot of people upset. But now that the dust has settled, and I think there have been several other kites been flown in relation to where the Abbey might go. There was talk of, the Grange Gorman site. There was talk of the GPO site. There was talk about acquiring buildings and moving the theatre down onto the river. None of that has happened, and I hope for the Abbey's sake that they do get a new building at some point, because it's not in a great location, and it's a very disappointing building. And a lot of people come from abroad to see the wonderful Abbey Theatre, and this is what they're met with. So, but I do think, in retrospect, and I've done shows in the Bord Gais Energy Theatre, including the one that you kindly mentioned in your introduction, the Madama Butterfly, and it's a wonderful location. And I did think when I went in there with that opera how wonderful it would be if the Abbey were here, but it was not to be.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, well, so Ben, you've already had an amazing career in the theatre, working here, working in the States, working all over, and you've brought shows all over the place internationally. So what is it that keeps you coming back to the theatre? What moves you? What excites you about theatre?
Well, I love working in the room with the actors. That's the payoff for me. I mean, I've worked as an artistic director in parallel with being a director all my life. I started out with the Opera Theatre Company, and I had my company Groundwork. I was in the Gaiety for a number of years. Then I was artistic director of the Abbey, and now I'm at the Theatre Royal in Waterford, and I can't say that I like the idea of choosing a season and choosing directors and designers and actors and building all that up into something coherent. But I've never really been good at or enjoyed the public side of artistic direction, the media facing, all the politics, particularly in the Irish theatre, or I suppose in any small country. It can be fraught, and it certainly was for me. And I was involved in quite a lot of controversy, one sort or another, when I was at the Abbey all those years ago, and I wrote my book, Plays and Controversies, about that. But I love problem solving with actors in a rehearsal room. I have some wonderful theaters that I work for in America, which are regional theaters where the actors are there and they're there to work on the play and are very dedicated. And it's not like when you're working in London or New York or even Dublin, where the actors do the film day here and an audition there and a voiceover almost anywhere. You can't, actor comes up to you and says, look, I've this voiceover and it's worth X amount of money and it'll pay my mortgage for the year. You can't say, well, look, I can't really release you to do that. So you're constantly, in those bigger places, you're constantly compromising. But some of those rehearsal rooms that I work with in the regional theatre in America, where you really, you have a group of people and you're working in a very laboratory-like way. And I just love taking a play from a page to the stage, and I work in a very collaborative way. So I feel that my job is to create an atmosphere in the room where people will try anything and everything. And then it's my job to select and arrange from the options that the actors give me to create something that's coherent. So I really always love that process. And I think I'm not one of these directors who stands at the back of the auditorium at every performance, watching the audience react. I like to be at the previews. I like to be at the opening. I might pop in the odd time, but generally once something is open, I sort of feel it belongs to the audience and the actors. And I tend to kind of want to move on to the next thing. So I love planning productions. I love dreaming up how I'd like to stage them, and then finding out what works and what doesn't work. And I'm not arrogant in that regard. I'm not an auteur. I work collaboratively with the people that I work with in the room. And it's always been, I find actors incredibly open and generous people, and very disciplined as well. And I love all that. And that's what keeps me coming back to it. I'm working on a book at the moment of photographs from my opera and theatre productions from 1980 to 2020. It's 169 productions. So, I think, something's got to work for you to make you want to keep going back and doing that again and again. I've been working solidly in the theatre for 40 years, and I hope I've another little while left still.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned, problem-solving skills and things like that, but is there any, tools or skills from theatre that you've developed in your theatrical life that you found useful, in the rest of your life?
I try and keep my work life and my I try and keep them. I think as a director, you're putting a frame around something, and everything that happens within that frame, you're responsible for. And I always feel you should be able to, at any given moment, if the action stops, you should be able to explain, why something, if something has been moved or somebody moves, you need to be able to explain why that's there. I mean, my answer to like an actor who says, well, maybe I'll move over here. I say, well, why? There always has to be a reason for something. You can't do anything arbitrarily. And I think, I always start out with a kind of a governing idea of, what I want and what I want something to look like, what I'm trying to convey. Now, of course, that's filtered through the rehearsal process and to other people's input. But funnily enough, it always sort of comes back to, a vision that's there and that's encapsulated by light, by costume, by set, by props, by actors. And it's there, and it's something that you can, it's not perfect, but it is something that you've conceived, and you've done your best to control what happens within that frame. And I think in my younger days, I tried to make my life like that as well. I wanted to be in control of everything. Right. And I remember when my children were small, they're grown and gone now. They're both at Trinity. And but I remember when we would have parties at the house. This house down here is quite a big house, and we might invite 60 or 70 people at Christmas for drinks and stuff like that. And inevitably, although there's a big living room with a fire and a big kitchen and other rooms, everybody, that thing, everybody would congregate in the one room. Yeah. And I would be trying to direct. And my daughters would come up to me and say, Dad, it's not a play. They'll find their way to the other rooms eventually. So I think one of the things I have learned, and it's come to me quite late in life, is that you can't always, control the outcomes. And I try to go a bit more with the flow now than I used to, and I'm a happier person for that. I don't try and shoehorn everything into my vision of what it should be like. So I'm not sure if that's what you had in mind.
That's great. That's great.
One of the things that I've learned to, let go a little bit, and I'm not trying to be in control, because I think, directors are to some extent control freaks. and you're paid to control what happens, but you're not in real life. So that's a good lesson, I think.
Nice.
Well, this has been so terrific, Ben. Really, thanks so much for doing it. Just as a bonus, can you tell us anything about what you're working on at the moment?
Oh, right. Okay, so I've been working with the Eugene O'Neill International Theatre Festival in Ross over the last number of years, and I've been doing long O'Neill plays that are very rarely staged. Strange Interlude, Morning Becomes Electra, and this year More Stately Mansions. And we bring a group of actors together and we read the play. And this year we're going to film it as well, because we can only have a small number of people in the house. Yeah. So I've been working on the edit for that in the last while. I am working on, with the composer Tom Lane, a new opera based on a story called Woman at the Window, 11 a.m., which is based itself on a painting by Edward Hopper. And I'm writing the libretto for that. So that's a kind of a new experience for me. Yeah. And then my company, Four Rivers, which is has been started to provide professional theatre in the southeast of Ireland. We're preparing to do a new production of Beauty Queen of Leenane in the autumn. And we're reviving a production of Blackbird, which I directed a few years ago. So both those productions, restrictions allowing, will be on stage in the autumn. And I work with the Wexford Playwrights Workshop, and we have been developing 6 new plays, which have all been filmed and are currently streaming. But I've taken 2 of those plays, one by a woman writer called Hannah McNiven, and another by a guy called Dominic Palmer. And we, Four Rivers, my company, have optioned those plays, and we're going to hope to produce them next year. So with Hannah's play, it's called Lights Out, and it's a 2-hander, and I'm doing a workshop on that next week with Ronan Leahy and Eloise Stevenson. So that's literally my next piece of work will be next week, but I'm happily working away on lots of different things, as you can see, and looking forward to when the theatres fully reopen again, which should be, we hope, certainly early 22. Although we expect we'll have some audiences between now and then. I think it'll be probably the new year before audiences are fully back, and it'll be nice to be getting back and doing what we do again.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Ben, thank you so very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
No, it's been my pleasure to talk to you, and enjoyed that, and good luck with all your ventures.
Thank you very much, and thank you to you, the audience, for joining us. If you enjoyed the interview, please like below and follow AboutFACE, and why not share, because we believe theater makes life better. So we'll see you next time on AboutFACE Theatre presents 5 Questions With. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and share. Thanks for watching.